close your eyes and let the distant rhythmic pulse of late 19th century London settle around you like a heavy velvet blanket. Imagine the world outside fading into a soft, gray nothingness as the great city is swallowed by a relentless March fog. This is not the sharp, cold mist of the countryside, but the thick, yellowed haze of a capital fueled by coal and mystery, a vapor that clings to the brickwork and muffles the heavy iron wheels of passing hansom cabs. From the tall, soot-stained windows of our sanctuary at 221B Baker Street, the streetlights below appear only as dim, ghost-like orbs of amber, struggling to pierce the gloom. But inside, within the sturdy stone walls of our shared sitting room, there is only warmth, stillness, and the profound sense of absolute security. You are seated in a deep, high-backed armchair, upholstered in worn, soft velvet that seems to absorb the very air around you. The fire in the hearth is a living thing, a steady companion that breathes with a low, comforting hum. Its embers glow with a deep, visceral crimson, casting a golden radiance over the rows of leather-bound books that line the walls from floor to ceiling. The scent of the room is a familiar tapestry of comfort, a delicate blend of dry parchment, aged cedar wood, and the lingering, aromatic ghost of a mild Cavendish tobacco. Every sound here is deliberate and soothing. The rhythmic, metronomic ticking of the mahogany grandfather clock serves as a reminder that within this room, time does not race. It flows like a slow, dark river, inviting your mind to drift and your body to surrender to the stillness of the morning. Across from you sits Sherlock Holmes, a silent silhouette against the flickering firelight. He is a man of legendary energy, yet in these quiet hours, he possesses a stillness that is almost statuesque. He is draped in his favorite dressing gown of deep plum silk, his long, slender fingers resting lightly together in a gesture of contemplation. There is no urgency in his posture, only a calm, meditative focus that fills the room with a sense of intellectual peace. He understands the value of silence, the way a mind must sometimes rest in the shadows before it can see the truth. The only other sound is the soft, rhythmic rasp of my fountain pen as I record our previous adventures, a steady scratching that harmonizes with the low sigh of the wind in the chimney. We are safe here, protected from the chaos of the empire by the weight of these walls and the shared understanding of a long, unspoken friendship. The morning tea rests on a low table between us, the steam rising in lazy, translucent spirals that catch the amber light. The porcelain of the cup is smooth and warm, and the scent of the Earl Grey is bright and floral, a small reminder of order in a world that often feels untethered. As the fire settles with a soft, melodic pop of a coal fragment, the world outside feels miles away, a distant memory of noise and movement that cannot reach this golden pocket of tranquility. Here, your breath can slow, your shoulders can soften, and your thoughts can untangle themselves as the heat of the hearth settles deep into your bones. We are waiting for nothing and everything at once, resting in the quiet heart of the world's greatest city. The stillness is eventually touched by a soft rhythmic knocking at the heavy oak door downstairs, a sound so muffled by the fog that it feels like a dream. Soon, a small, folded slip of paper is brought to us, a telegram from Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. Holmes accepts the parchment with a languid grace, his movements slow and deliberate, so as not to disturb the equilibrium of the room. He unfolds it, his keen eyes scanning the brief lines, while the firelight plays across his sharp, thoughtful features. He does not speak for a long time, allowing the silence to reclaim the space, before he finally shares the contents in a voice that is low, resonant, and remarkably calm. Lestrade's message is uncharacteristically sparse, devoid of his usual bluster and bureaucratic tone. A man has been found in the shadowed depths of Whitechapel, resting on the cold, damp stones near Commercial Street. There are no marks of violence upon him, no signs of a desperate struggle, and no indication that he met his end through the common brutality of the streets. His pockets are not empty, his meager possessions remain untouched, yet his hand is locked in a rigid, unnatural grip around a single copper penny. It is an 1887 Jubilee coin, uncirculated and gleaming, as if it were minted only yesterday. A strange bitter aroma lingers about the body, a scent of almonds that suggests a poison of terrifying efficiency, yet one that leaves no visible trace of its passage. Holmes lets the telegram rest on his knee, his gaze returning to the glowing embers of the fire. The case of the poisoned penny has begun, not with a cry of alarm, but with a whisper of a riddle that demands a surgeon's precision and a philosopher's patience. The coin is a signature, a deliberate mark left by a mind that moves with the same mechanical certainty as the clock on our mantelpiece. It is a tragedy of the smallest scale, a single life extinguished in a gutter. Yet the presence of that pristine copper suggests a grander design, a story of pride and retribution that began long before the fog rolled in this morning. As Holmes stands to prepare for our departure, his movements remain fluid and unhurried. He does not rush toward the door. Instead, he pauses to adjust the heavy velvet curtains, ensuring the warmth of the room is preserved for our eventual return. The transition from our sanctuary to the world outside is not a leap, but a slow, rhythmic descent. We must trade the scent of cedar and tea for the damp, metallic tang of day. London streets, but the sense of calm we have cultivated here will go with us. We shall carry the stillness of Baker Street into the heart of the mystery, moving through the gray mists of the East End like ghosts in a landscape of shadows. The cobblestones are waiting, wet with the morning dew, and the secrets of Whitechapel are calling to us from beneath the heavy, suffocating blanket of the fog. The carriage moves through the night with a heavy, rhythmic swaying, a motion that lulls the senses into a state of quiet, detached observation. Outside the leather-bound interior of our hansom, the familiar world of Baker Street has been utterly replaced by the sprawling, shadowed labyrinth of the East End. The sound of our progress is a steady, hypnotic pulse, the metallic ring of iron-shod hooves striking the rain-slicked cobblestones, followed by the low wooden creak of the springs as we navigate the uneven marrow of London's ancient veins. It is a cadence that speaks of inevitability, a slow, deliberate march toward the heart of a mystery that feels as deep and as dark as the River Thames itself. The air that seeps through the narrow cracks of the door is no longer scented with the comforts of home. It carries the damp, salt-tinged breath of the distant docks and the heavy, lingering soot of 1,000 coal fires, a scent that tells of a city that never truly sleeps, even in its most silent hours. As we descend at the corner of Hanbury Street, the fog greets us like a silent, spectral inhabitant of the district. It is thicker here, a textured gray curtain that swallows the flickering light of the gas lamps before it can ever reach the ground. The silence of Whitechapel at this hour is not a void, but a living presence, a heavy, suffocating stillness that seems to press gently against the ears. The usual roar of the city, the shouts of costermongers, and the clatter of commerce has been completely extinguished, leaving only the distant, rhythmic drip of water from a rusted iron pipe and the faint, ghostly rustle of a stray newspaper tumbling across the whetstones. Every step we take produces a soft, echoing thud that dissipates almost instantly into the mist, making us feel as though we are walking through a dream where time has ceased to function and the boundary between the past and the present has grown thin. The scene of the tragedy is marked by the dim, flickering lantern of a lone constable, its amber light struggling to illuminate the narrow, grime-stained alleyway. There, resting against the cold, soot-covered brickwork, lies the man whom the city has already forgotten. He is a small figure, made even smaller by the immense, looming shadows of the surrounding warehouses. His clothing is a tapestry of poverty, a collection of tattered wool and stained canvas that has seen better decades. Yet there is a strange, dignified peace in his posture. He does not look like a man who met a violent end. He looks like one who simply sat down to rest his weary bones and found the sleep to be deeper and more permanent than he ever intended. As we lean closer, the heavy, metallic smell of the wet street and the damp earth is suddenly pierced by something entirely incongruous. Something sharp, clean, and strangely sweet. It is the scent of bitter almonds. It hangs in the freezing air, a phantom fragrance that clings to the fibers of the man's tattered coat like a delicate, invisible perfume. In this place of decay and coal dust, the smell is a jarring reminder of a laboratory's cold, clinical precision. It is the unmistakable signature of cyanide, a poison that acts with the speed of a lightning bolt and the absolute silence of a passing shadow. Holmes inhales the air with a slow, deliberate breath, his face a mask of intense concentration in the shadows. The sweetness of the scent is a mask for a terrifying lethargy, a chemical whisper that commands the heart to stop without a single cry of protest. It is an incredibly sophisticated death for a man of the streets, an expensive and calculated end for one who possessed nothing more than the rags on his back. From somewhere far to the south, beyond the jagged, dark silhouettes of the rooftops, the long, mournful groan of a foghorn rises from the river. It is a low-frequency vibration that seems to travel through the very stones beneath our feet, rather than the air itself. Muffled and dreamlike, the sound repeats at regular intervals, a rhythmic heartbeat for a city lost in the deep mist. It serves as a constant reminder of the vast, unfeeling machinery of the world. The great ships moving blindly through the dark water and the endless flow of the tide toward the sea. The sound is both haunting and deeply grounding, a sonic anchor that pulls the mind further into a state of quiet, focused contemplation as we stand over the remains of a life cut short by a hidden and highly calculated hand. The constable moves his lantern slightly, and for a fleeting second, a spark of brilliant light erupts from the center of the dead man's hand. It is a concentrated flash of orange gold that cuts through the gray gloom like a dying star. Despite the rigid, unnatural clenching of his fingers, a small portion of the object is visible, protruding from the seam of his weathered palm. It is a coin, but not a worn, dirty penny of the streets that one might expect to find. This object is polished to a mirror-like sheen, its copper surface catching the dim lamplight with a defiant, artificial glow that feels out of place in this alley. It sits there, a pristine monument of wealth, held in a hand of absolute destitution, a silent and cold witness to a crime that began not with the flash of a blade, but with the hard, heavy weight of a single piece of currency. Holmes reaches out, his movements so steady and slow that they barely seem to disturb the quiet air around us. He does not touch the coin directly, instead using a small pair of silver tweezers to examine the precise angle at which it is held within the grip. The man's hold is not merely a spasm of death. It is a lock, a final and permanent embrace of the very thing that ended his journey. The contrast between the gleaming, uncirculated copper and the gray, weathered skin of the victim is profound, a visual representation of a pride that consumes and kills. We stand in the heart of the Whitechapel shadows, surrounded by the rhythmic breathing of the fog and the distant, lonely call of the river, staring at a small circle of metal that holds the key to a much larger and darker arithmetic of revenge. The coin is not just money. It is a message, and as the fog settles deeper into the alley, we begin to realize that this is only the first page of a much longer story written in copper and poison. The steady amber glow of the magnifying lamp creates a small private sun upon the dark mahogany surface of the laboratory table, casting the rest of the room into a soft, velvety darkness that feels almost tangible. Within this circle of intense, concentrated light, the 1887 Jubilee Penny rests upon a scrap of pristine white silk, appearing less like a common piece of currency and more like a sacred relic unearthed from an ancient, silent tomb. Its copper surface is unnaturally bright, possessing a deep, mirror-like luster that seems to hold the light within its grain, rather than merely reflecting it back. As we lean in, the world beyond this golden circle ceases to exist entirely. The freezing fog of Whitechapel, the damp chill of the morning, and the heavy, soot-laden weight of the city are all replaced by the silent, mesmerizing geography of a single inch of cold metal. It is a moment of profound intellectual stillness, where the mind is invited to focus on the minute, the specific, and the beautifully complex. To truly understand this coin is to understand the meticulous, rhythmic soul of the royal mint during the height of the Victorian era. In the year 1887, to celebrate the Golden Jubilee of the Queen, a series of commemorative coins were struck with a level of precision that bordered on the obsessive. The process began with the selection of the copper alloy, a blend of metals purified to a degree that ensured a particular resonance and a perfect weight. Imagine the great steam-driven presses of the mint, their massive iron arms moving with a slow, heavy grace, descending upon the blank copper planchets with tons of unwavering pressure to create the sharp, crisp lines of the royal profile. This specific penny exhibits a proof-like quality rarely ever seen in general circulation. The fields, those flat areas behind the portrait, are as smooth as a frozen lake in midwinter, while the raised elements of the design possess a frosted, delicate texture that catches the light at every possible angle. As Holmes moves a powerful glass lens over the coin, the details expand into a vast landscape of intentional artistry. We see the microscopic ridges of the Queen's crown, each pearl and tiny filigree rendered with a clarity that defies the naked eye. But it is the imperfections that hold the true story, the tiny die markers that serve as a unique fingerprint for the specific machine that birthed it. There is a tiny, almost invisible doubling of the letter G in the Latin inscription, a ghost image caused by a slight, rhythmic shift in the steel die. During the second strike, furthermore, the outer rim of the coin shows minute, horizontal striations, evidence of a steel collar that was slightly tighter than the standard issue. These are not flaws in the traditional sense. They are the mechanical signatures of a master engraver's specific moment in time, a mechanical heartbeat, frozen forever in copper. The history of such a piece is a journey through the quiet, dust-filled corridors of numismatic scholarship. In 1887, the mint produced a mere handful of specimen sets intended solely for the private cabinets of the royal family and the high archives of the British Museum. These coins were never meant to feel the warmth of a common pocket or the grime of a merchant's till. They were handled only with the softest silk gloves and kept in velvet-lined boxes, preserved as a testament to the empire's industrial perfection. To see such a coin in a dark alleyway in Whitechapel is a profound contradiction, as if a rare, fragile orchid had been found blooming in a coal cellar. The alloy itself, when tapped gently with a silver probe, emits a high, pure note that lingers in the quiet air of the laboratory. A sound of quality and exclusivity that stands in stark contrast to the destitution of the man who held it. Holmes settles back into his deep chair, his eyes half closed as he cross-references these physical traits with a heavy, leather-bound volume of the National Numismatic Registry. The room is silent, save for the rhythmic, comforting sound of the fire and the low, steady hum of the gaslight. He turns the thick, cream-colored pages with a slow, deliberate grace, his fingers tracing the long columns of serial numbers and minting dates. The registry is a map of every significant piece of metal to pass through the London gates, a record of heritage and value that spans across centuries of history. In this atmosphere of academic calm, the mystery takes on a different, more refined shape. It is no longer a matter of blood and shadows, but of ledgers, archives, and the slow, inexorable movement of recorded history. The reveal comes not with a shout of excitement, but with a quiet, measured observation that carries the weight of certainty. Holmes points to a specific entry in the ledger, his finger resting beneath a line of fine, cramped script. This coin is not merely a rarity. It is a ghost, according to the official records. 3 such uncirculated Jubilee pennies were removed from the experimental archives of the National Mint 5 years ago for a detailed study on metallic oxidation. They were never returned. They vanished into the administrative cracks of a vast bureaucracy, presumed lost or stolen by some minor, nameless official. For 5 years, they have been silent and hidden, only to reappear now in the cold hand of a dead beggar. This coin is a bridge between the highest, most secure halls of government and the lowest, darkest depths of the street. A stolen piece of the nation's pride, used as a tool for a very private and very deadly purpose. The laboratory becomes a place of rhythmic recording, a sanctuary of logic and ink. Holmes takes up his heavy quill pen, and the air is filled with the soft, scratching sound of the nib on parchment as he logs the microscopic dimensions and the specific die doubling he has observed. It is a soothing, repetitive noise, the sound of order being slowly imposed upon chaos. Every stroke of the pen is a step toward the truth, a steady march of logic recorded in black ink that will outlast the fog. The scratching continues, rising and falling in a gentle cadence that harmonizes perfectly with the slow ticking of the clock, creating a lullaby of deduction that invites the mind to drift into a state of deep, focused tranquility. The coin rests under the lamp, a silent witness to this process of intellectual reconstruction, its golden orange glow, a constant warm presence in the gathering shadows of the room. We are suspended in this moment of academic peace, surrounded by the comforting scent of old paper and the gentle warmth of the hearth, when the external world intrudes once more. A second messenger, breathless and damp with the clinging fog, delivers a fresh report from the heart of the city. It is a brief, urgent note that shatters the silence without ever raising its voice. A director of the Lombard Street bank, a man of immense influence and impeccable social standing, has just collapsed over his heavy mahogany desk. Like the beggar in Whitechapel, he showed no prior signs of illness, and like the beggar, he was found clutching a single pristine copper coin. The pattern is no longer a mere coincidence. It is a deliberate, mathematically precise sequence. The poisoned penny has moved from the gutter of the slum to the counting house of the elite, and as the ink dries slowly on Holmes's notes, we begin to realize that the arithmetic of revenge is accelerating through the veins of London. The carriage comes to a slow, deliberate halt before the towering, soot-stained facade of the Lombard Street banking house. Stepping out into the late afternoon air, the atmosphere feels fundamentally different here than it did in the cramped, salt-aired alleys of the East End. In this district, the fog does not merely cling to the ground. It seems to respect the heavy neoclassical stone of the financial cathedrals that line the street, swirling in silent, respectful eddies around the massive granite columns. As the heavy iron-studded oak doors swing open with a low, distant groan, we are greeted not by the roar of commerce, but by a cold, hollow echo that speaks of immense vertical space and even greater buried secrets. The interior of the bank is a landscape of profound, ancient stillness. Soaring marble pillars, carved from the pale gray stone of distant, silent quarries, rise like ancient trees toward a vaulted ceiling that remains lost in the gathering shadows of the evening. Every single footstep we take upon the polished checkerboard floor produces a sharp, rhythmic sound that travels upward, bouncing off the cold stone surfaces and dissipating into the vast, lightless voids above our heads. This is a place built for permanence, for the slow and careful accumulation of vast wealth over generations. Yet, today, it feels more like a silent, grand tomb. We move slowly through the expansive teller hall, past the empty brass cages and the high, silent desks where the city's ledgers are normally kept in perfect order. The air is notably cool and smells of fine floor wax, old parchment, and the lingering metallic tang of the great steel vaults that sit somewhere deep in the dark earth below. There is no sense of urgency in our pace. The architecture itself demands a certain quiet reverence, a slowing of the breath as we transition from the harsh grit of the street to the polished, absolute solemnity of the financial elite. As we approach the private executive offices at the rear of the building, the cold marble gives way to heavy, dark mahogany and thick, plush carpets that swallow the very sound of our arrival, drawing us further into a world of muffled, expensive silence. In the director's private sanctuary, the scene is one of frozen industry. Mr. Edward Hollis, a man whose very name once commanded the movement of gold across vast oceans, remains seated at his expansive desk of polished, aged oak. He is slumped forward in a position that, at first glance, might suggest he had simply fallen into a deep, heavy midday slumber over his laborious work. The desk is a vast landscape of orderly chaos. Tall, neat stacks of parchment, heavy brass inkwells, and the long, leather-bound ledgers that defined every hour of his long life. A large blot of black ink has spread across the page directly before him, its dark obsidian fingers creeping slowly and inevitably toward the edge of the carved wood. The scent of the room is a heavy, comforting blend of that spilled ink, the deep, rich aroma of the oak furniture, and the faint, dry fragrance of expensive cigar smoke that has seeped into the heavy velvet curtains over many long years of service. It is a scene of absolute dignified quietude, where the complex machinery of a powerful life has been halted by a single, invisible gear. Holmes moves with the silent grace of a shadow, his eyes scanning the surface of the desk without disturbing a single grain of dust. He leans down slowly, his gaze settling on the director's right hand, which rests near the edge of a revoked loan agreement. The fingers are curled in a tight, protective arc, echoing the exact unnatural rigidity we witnessed earlier in the dark alley of Whitechapel. Gently, using the tip of a silver penknife, Holmes eases the grip just enough to reveal the object hidden within the pale palm. There, nestled against the manicured skin of the banker, lies a second Jubilee Penny. It is identical to the first in every microscopic detail, the same mirror-like luster, the same sharp, frosted profile of the queen, and the same orange-gold glow that seems to vibrate against the dark, heavy grain of mahogany. The contrast is chilling and profound. The coin that was a small fortune to a beggar is a mere pittance to a banker, yet it has served as the final equalizing currency for both men, marking the end of their paths with a singular metallic finality. The room settles into a state of profound, heavy quiet that feels almost heavy upon the skin. As the sun begins to set behind the jagged, dark skyline of the city, a single, low-angled beam of dying light pierces the high clerestory window, cutting through the gloom like a golden spear of ancient sunlight. Within this beam, thousands upon thousands of tiny dust motes begin a slow, hypnotic dance, rising and falling in the still air with no apparent effort or purpose. They drift in lazy, spiraling patterns, a silent miniature universe that moves in perfect harmony with the slow, heavy ticking of the brass clock on the mantel. This visual rhythm, the constant rising and falling of the gold-flecked dust, creates a lullaby for the eyes, a mesmerizing display of insignificance that stands in stark contrast to the heavy, world-altering ledgers sitting upon the desk. The silence is so deep that the faint, rhythmic creak of the building's settling timber sounds like a whispered secret, inviting the mind to drift away from the immediate tragedy and into the peaceful, golden haze of the twilight. Holmes does not move for a long time, watching the dance of the dust motes as if they held the hidden formula for the poison itself within their tiny forms. He understands that this is not a crime of sudden passion, but one of meticulous, mathematical design and cold patience. The deliberate choice of victims, a man at the very bottom of the social ladder, and a man at its highest peak, suggests a bridge being built, a leveling of the scales by a hand that values symbolic justice over the common law of the land. The subtle bitterness of the almond scent is present here too, though it is faint, partially masked by the expensive perfumes of the office and the smell of old wood. Yet it remains the undeniable tether between the two deaths. The poison penny has traversed the vast city, moving through the thick fog in the marble halls with a silent, unerring trajectory, guided by a mind that perceives London not as a city of living people, but as a vast, interconnected ledger of unpaid debts and forgotten credits. Slowly and with great care, Holmes turns his attention away from the dead and toward the living records of the bank. He moves to the high, dark shelves that line the back wall, where the personnel files and employment registers are kept in perfect chronological order. The sound of his movements is a rhythmic, comforting rustle. The smooth slide of a heavy drawer, the crisp, sharp snap of a folder being opened, and the soft, dry sound of thick paper being turned over. He begins the laborious, methodical process of sifting through the names of every clerk, every messenger, and every junior official who has been dismissed or sanctioned by this house over the last decade. It is a slow, hypnotic search through the ghosts of the bank's past, a search for a name that finally links the counting house to the slum. As the shadows lengthen and the golden beam of dust fades into a soft, monochromatic gray, we sit in the heart of the silent banking house, following the trail of ink and copper into the dark, unfolding arithmetic of a forgotten man's revenge. The transition from the grand, echoing marble halls of the bank to the cramped, dust-choked archives of the subterranean records room is a journey into the long-forgotten memory of the city. Down here, far beneath the frantic pulse of the London streets, the air is stagnant and heavy, smelling of decomposing glue, dry rot, and the sweet, vanilla-like scent of aging lignin. The silence in this underground chamber is absolute, broken only by the slow, rhythmic sound of Holmes's deliberate movements as he navigates the towering, shadow-draped shelves. There is a deep, meditative comfort to be found in the sound of heavy, yellowed ledger pages being slowly turned, a crisp, dry rasp that echoes softly against the cold stone wall. Each page is a thin layer of frozen time, a delicate vellum leaf holding the faded, ink-stained ghost of a life once lived in the quiet service of the ledger. As the pages turn, one after another, the repetitive sound becomes a hypnotic cadence, inviting the mind to settle into the slow, steady rhythm of a buried past. Within these brittle and fragile records, a singular shadow begins to take form, the shadow of a man named Edgar Vifroy. He was not originally a creature of the dark slums, but a man of meticulous order and quiet dignity, a senior clerk who had given 20 loyal years of his life to the cold, hard arithmetic of Lombard Street. His handwriting, preserved perfectly in the earlier volumes, is a testament to a soul that found true peace in precision. Every stroke is elegant, every numeral perfectly aligned, a silent music of total devotion to the bank's prosperity. But as we follow his trail through the passing years, the records begin to tell a darker story of systemic cruelty and indifference. We see the cold, bureaucratic notations made by Edward Hollis the director, who now lies silent inil. His high office as he systematically and ruthlessly dismantled Edgar's world. A denied pension, a summary dismissal based on a minor clerical error, and finally, the cold seizure of a small family home to cover a debt that the bank itself had engineered. It is a slow-motion collapse of a human life, recorded in the dispassionate, freezing ink of those who viewed him not as a living man, but as a depreciating asset on a balance sheet. As Holmes traces his long finger down the final tragic entry of Edgar's official employment, he pauses in the dim lantern light. The golden glow reveals a recurring and peculiar mark, a small, crescent-shaped ink smudge found at the bottom of every single file that documented Edgar's ruin. It is a subtle, silver-gray stain, shaped like the waning moon, appearing on the eviction notice, the harsh dismissal letter, and the final rejection of his desperate appeal. This is the true ledger's ghost, a physical manifestation of a broken spirit, a smudge left by a trembling hand that had spent 2 full decades perfecting its craft only to be discarded like a broken nib. It is a mark of profound and quiet sorrow, a signature of the exact moment when order turned into absolute chaos. The smudge is not an accidental stain. It is a scar, a silent cry for recognition that has waited patiently in the darkness of the archives for 10 long years, to finally be seen by a discerning eye. Holmes's voice drops to a low, steady resonance as he begins to read the subsequent hidden history of Edgar Victorian. His tone is completely devoid of judgment, possessing a rhythmic, soothing quality that feels like a dark and gentle lullaby for the restless mind. He speaks of Edgar's slow descent into the crushing anonymous poverty of Whitechapel, of a man who possessed the brilliant organized mind of an architect, but was forced to live among the damp shadows of the docks. We hear of the cold nights spent in the abandoned workshops of the East End, of the hunger that sharpens the mind into a single crystalline point of lethal obsession. Edgar did not turn to the comfort of drink or the path of common crime. Instead, he retreated into the only world he truly knew, the world of metallurgy, fine mechanics, and meticulous design. In the absolute silence of his exile, he began to craft his own version of justice, turning the very tools of the bank's trade into instruments of a final, irreversible settlement. It is a story of tragic inevitability, of a man who was pushed so far into the darkness that he eventually became the darkness itself. The biography of the perpetrator unfolds like a slow-moving dark river, each detail adding to the weight of the inevitable end. Holmes reads of Edgar's late-night visits to the Royal Mint's public galleries, of his secret, lonely studies in the properties of rare alkaloids, and of his singular burning focus on the Jubilee Penny, the grand symbol of the very empire that had forsaken him. The rhythm of Holmes's narration is mesmerizing, a steady, calm flow of words that describes a life being distilled into a single lethal intent. You can almost feel the weight of the passing years pressing down on Edgar in his cold room, the slow and steady accumulation of bitterness that eventually transformed a humble, quiet clerk into a master of poisons and precision. It is the story of a pride that was broken by the powerful, and then forged anew in a private fire of quiet, patient hatred. As the final, heavy ledger is closed with a soft, heavy thud that sends a small cloud of ancient dust dancing into the warm lantern light. A cold realization settles over the quiet room. The arithmetic of Edgar's revenge is not yet complete. The two victims, the beggar who represented his fall from grace and the banker who represented his ruin, were merely the bookends of a much larger and more complex ledger. There's one more name, one more individual who played a pivotal and final role in the sealing of Edgar's fate. Holmes looks at the empty space on the desk, his mind already projecting the next move in this deadly clockwork sequence. The next victim has already been chosen, a figure who stands as the final barrier between Edgar and the peace he so desperately seeks. The trail of the poisoned penny leads away from the archives and back into the thick fog of the city, moving toward a final destination that Edgar has been preparing for since the very day he left this building for the last time. The cycle of debt is nearly closed, and the final payment is about to be demanded in the silence of the London night. The return to our familiar rooms at Baker Street feels like a homecoming to a world of absolute, unchanging reason. The transition from the damp, unpredictable fog of the city to the controlled clinical stillness of the laboratory is a profound balm for the weary mind. Here, the air is sharp and clean with the medicinal scent of ozone and spirits of wine, a fragrance that signals the beginning of a deeper, more peaceful understanding of the world's hidden mechanics. The centerpiece of the room is the steady, hypnotic blue flame of the spirit lamp, flickering with a gentle, rhythmic hiss that cuts through the silence like a soft whisper. Its light is cool and ethereal, casting long, translucent shadows that stretch lazily across the glass beakers and silver instruments laid out upon the zinc-top table. Within this circle of sapphire light, we are safe, anchored by the eternal laws of chemistry and the steady rhythmic pulse of scientific inquiry. Holmes sits before the table, his movements possessing the fluid, unhurried grace of a master artisan. He has produced a single black leather glove, an object found hidden within a secret compartment of a desk that once belonged to the long-lost Edgar V. To the casual eye, it is merely a discarded accessory of a working man, yet, under Holmes's steady and experienced hand, it begins to reveal its dark, mechanical secrets. With a small, silver-handled scalpel, he begins to dissect the glove, the blade moving with a soft, rhythmic sound as it parts the fine-grained leather. He peels back the silk lining with the tenderness of a surgeon, exposing a layer of soft felt that has been meticulously hollowed out by a steady hand. Beneath it lies a marvel of microscopic engineering, a tiny silver reservoir no larger than a single grain of rice, connected to a needle so fine it is almost invisible to the naked eye. The mechanism is a true masterpiece of clockwork precision, a silent silver tooth hidden within a velvet embrace, waiting for a single touch. As we watch in the dim light, the true genius of the device is slowly laid bare. Holmes uses a pair of fine-tipped tweezers to demonstrate the action of the hidden needle. It is not a fixed point, but a delicate pressure-sensitive trigger. The poison does not sit upon the cold surface of the copper coin as we had first suspected. The coin is merely the bait, a brilliant lure designed to ensure a specific high-pressure grip from the victim. When a person reaches out to seize the gleaming Jubilee Penny, their thumb naturally and inevitably presses against a specific point on the outer seam of the glove. This slight pressure activates a minute-hidden bellows, forcing a measured lethal dose of the rare alkaloid through the needle and directly into the porous skin of the palm. It is a delivery system of terrifying efficiency, a weapon that requires the victim's own instinct of possession to act as the firing pin. The realization is a moment of cold, scientific awe, a quiet recognition of a mind that has turned the very act of holding into a terminal event. The laboratory now becomes a sanctuary of rhythmic sound, a sonic landscape that lulls the senses into a state of deep, focused calm. Holmes begins the delicate process of neutralizing the toxic residue within the silver reservoir, and the room is filled with the soothing, repetitive music of the laboratory. We hear the soft, rhythmic bubbling of a saline solution in a glass retort, a sound like a gentle, clear stream flowing over smooth, ancient stones. This is punctuated by the steady metronomic drip of a glass pipette as Holmes carefully adds a clear reagent to a narrow test tube. Each drop hits the liquid with a clear, resonant sound, followed by a slow, swirling change of color from a deep, bruised purple to a clear, tranquil emerald green. The sounds are consistent, predictable, and deeply grounding, a lullaby of cause and effect that invites the mind to drift into a state of absolute tranquility as the colors merge and fade. The blue flame continues its gentle, silent dance, reflecting in the curved surfaces of the glassware and the polished silver of the instruments. There is no haste in this room, only the slow, methodical march of deduction, recorded in the rhythmic clink of glass and the soft, constant sigh of the spirit lamp, the scent of the reagents, a hint of cooling mint, a touch of light ether clears the mind, replacing the heavy, suffocating soot of the streets with a sense of crystalline clarity and order. We are suspended in a world of pure, unadulterated logic, where every complex mystery can eventually be reduced to its component parts, and every tragedy explained through the careful, patient observation of a silver needle. The stillness of the room acts as a shield, a place where the darkness of the external world is filtered through the lens of a microscope until it becomes something manageable, quieted and understood. As the final test tube is set back into its wooden rack with a soft, hollow click, Holmes turns his quiet attention to a small, hand-bound manuscript found tucked deep inside the lining of an old bank ledger. It is a private diary, written in the same elegant, sloping hand we observed in the early records. But here the ink is fresher, and the strokes are more forceful. Holmes begins to read aloud in a low, steady murmur that harmonizes perfectly with the fading hiss of the lamp. The entries describe the final, lonely stages of Edgar's grand plan, the careful calibration of the pressure triggers, and the selection of those who must pay the ultimate debt to his memory. He reads of the beggar, the banker, and the cold, mathematical necessity of their removal from the world. It is a document of a mind that has found a terrible, distorted kind of peace in the approaching completion of its work. The narration slows even further as Holmes reaches the very last page of the manuscript. The ink here is dark and heavy, as if the writer had paused for a long time before committing the final name to the paper. The final entry is not a description of a crime, but a directive for a final, fateful delivery. A cold, heavy silence settles over the laboratory as the name is finally revealed. Inspector Lestrade, the man who had officially signed the order for Edgar's final eviction, the man who represented the uncaring mechanical hand of the law, is the final name written in the ledger. The realization that our friend and colleague is at this very moment walking the streets with a target hidden in his own palm shatters the remaining calm of the laboratory. The trail of the poisoned penny has reached its zenith, and the final payment is no longer a matter of historical debt. It is a race against the slow, steady ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. The transition from the clinical, bright precision of Baker Street to the hollow and skeletal remains of Fleur-de-Lis Lane is a journey into the very heart of profound desolation. Here, in this forgotten corner of the city, the fog of London does not merely drift. It settles deep into the very bones of the ancient buildings, turning the narrow, winding passageways into a landscape of gray, dripping silence. We stand before the heavy doors of an abandoned print shop, its once proud signage now nothing more than a weathered, illegible ghost of Victorian commerce. As the heavy oak door yields with a long protesting groan of rusted iron hinges, we step into a world where time has not just slowed, but has altogether rotted away into the floorboards. The interior is a vast cathedral of neglect, a shadowy space where the air is thick with the scent of forgotten labor and the cold, metallic tang of stagnant, unmoving air. Stretching out into the heavy gloom are the massive skeletal forms of old printing presses, their heavy iron frames draped in elaborate, shimmering shrouds of silver cobwebs that catch the dim light like fine silk. These machines, which were once the thunderous, rhythmic heartbeat of the entire district, now sit in a state of eternal and rusting repose. The silence here is profound, a heavy layer of stillness that seems to absorb the very sound of our own rhythmic breathing. Every corner is occupied by a deep, velvety darkness that the flickering light of our small lantern can only graze, momentarily revealing piles of discarded lead type and the skeletal remains of wooden drying rack. It is a place of absolute solitude, where the only movement is the slow, hypnotic drifting of dust motes through the stagnant air, settling like a layer of gray snow upon the remnants of a lost and broken industry. As we move deeper into the ruins of the shop, the olfactory landscape begins to tell its own melancholy and tragic story. Beneath the dominant scent of damp brick and cold stone, there is the lingering oily ghost of old printer's ink, a thick, pungent aroma that has seeped into the very grain of the floorboards over decades of constant use. Mixed with this is the dry, vanilla-sweet fragrance of slowly decaying paper, thousands of ruined and forgotten sheets that have turned into a soft, pulpy mass in the dark corners of the room. It is a scent that evokes the inevitable passage of long years, the slow dissolution of recorded human thought back into the earth. The air is remarkably cold, a deep and biting chill that feels as though it has been trapped here since the massive boilers last went out. A cold that carries the quiet weight of 1,000 lonely midnights spent in the dark. In the rear of the shop, hidden carefully behind a high barricade of empty ink crates, we find the true sanctuary and final home of Edgar V. Foy. It is a space of heartbreakingly small proportions, a tiny island of obsessive, quiet order within the vast sea of industrial ruin. Here, amidst the staggering poverty of a dirt floor and a simple straw pallet, sits a workbench of incredible and jarring sophistication. Upon its scarred wooden surface are laid out the delicate, gleaming tools of a master watchmaker, silver loops, fine-tipped gravers, and a small, hand-cranked lathe that still gleams with the oily sheen of constant and meticulous use. This is the birthplace of the poisoned pennies here. In the freezing dark, Edgar spent his final years, his fingers numbed by the bitter cold, but guided by a singular, burning vision of quiet retribution. The contrast is overwhelming. The immense, crude machinery of the printing age surrounds a workspace dedicated entirely to the microscopic, lethal precision of a new and very private war. The atmosphere of the workshop is anchored by a haunting, rhythmic melody that seems to emanate from the very brickwork of the walls. A broken window pane in the high clerestory allows a thin, freezing stream of night air to enter the building, and as the wind passes over the jagged, sharp edge of the glass, it creates a long, mournful whistle. It is a low-frequency sound, rising and falling in a steady, hypnotic cadence that mimics the sound of a distant, lonely flute. This wind song fills the hollow, echoing space of the shop, providing a rhythmic accompaniment to the heavy silence. It is a sound of absolute abandonment, a lullaby of the void that invites the mind to drift away into the gray, silent reaches of Edgar's long loneliness. You can almost see him sitting there in your mind, silhouetted against the rusting iron presses, working by the dim light of a single tallow candle, while the wind sang its hollow, rhythmic song through the broken glass. Every single detail of this hidden life speaks of a man who has slowly pruned away every human desire and warmth until only the cold stem of his revenge remained. A single, chipped tin mug sits beside a small pile of bright copper shavings. A tattered wool coat, now as thin as a spider's web, hangs from a protruding gear of a dormant press. There are no books of poetry here, no letters from a distant home, only the cold, hard geometry of his lethal craft. The workshop is not a home in any sense. It is a cocoon, a place where a man of the bank ledger transformed himself into a master of the lethal shadow. The profound melancholy of the space is not aggressive or frightening. It is a soft, all-encompassing sadness that settles over you, a recognition of the terrible and quiet cost of a justice that is sought only in the dark. We stand for a long time, paralyzed by the sheer weight of this silence, our eyes tracing the silver threads of the cobwebs as they sway ever so slightly in the freezing draft. The workshop feels like a tomb that has already been sealed by time, a place where the living should not linger for too long. But then, the rhythmic whistling song of the wind is interrupted by a new, more visceral and heavy sound. It is a faint, rhythmic protest of ancient, dry wood, a slow, deliberate creak that emanates from the rotting wooden staircase, leading down from the dark loft above our heads. One step, followed by a long, heavy silence that feels like an eternity. Then another, the wood groaning softly under a weight that is familiar with every splinter and every nail. The killer has not fled the scene of his labor. He has been here all along, watching us from the iron shadows of his rusted forest. The cycle of the poisoned penny is returning to its point of origin, and the darkness of the workshop is finally about to find its voice. The transition from the cramped, hollow echoes of the workshop to the vast, open lungs of the East India Docks is a journey into a different and more profound kind of silence. Here, at the very edge of the great city's reach, the air is remarkably cold and carries the sharp, revitalizing scent of salt water and wet, ancient timber. As we reach the wharf, at the very first break of dawn, the River Thames reveals itself not as a churning artery of commerce, but as a flat, dark mirror of obsidian, perfectly reflecting the pale, bruised violet of the morning sky. There is a profound, liquid stillness to the water, a surface so undisturbed that it seems to hold the weight of the entire sleeping city in a delicate, glassy equilibrium. The heavy mist rolls off the tide in slow, rhythmic waves, draping the tall masts of the distant clipper ships in a soft, silver-gray shroud that muffles every single sound of the waking world. We find him not in a position of frantic flight, but in one of absolute and weary repose. Edgar Riffy is seated upon the weathered, salt-stained deck of an old tethered barge, his silhouette a jagged, dark line against the shimmering, metallic surface of the river. He does not startle at our quiet approach. He does not even turn his weary head as our boots strike the damp wood of the pier with a soft, rhythmic thud. He is watching the slow tide, his gaze fixed on the inexorable movement of the water as it begins its long, silent journey toward the open sea. As we step carefully onto the barge, the vessel shifts slightly beneath us, a slow and heavy movement that feels exactly like the deep breathing of the river itself. The air here is clean and smells of dark pitch, old hempen rope, and the deep cold mystery of the moving current. The dialogue that follows is not one of harsh accusation or anger, but a quiet, rhythmic exchange that feels more like a shared, whispered confession in the dark. Holmes stands at the rail, his own natural exhaustion mirrored in the slight, graceful slump of his shoulders, his voice a low, steady murmur that harmonizes perfectly with the gentle, constant lapping of the water against the wooden hull. Edgar speaks in a tone that is completely devoid of malice, a voice that has been weathered by 10 long years of isolation, until only the very core of his truth remains. There is an immense visible weariness in his eyes, not the frantic fatigue of a man on the run, but the profound, soul-deep exhaustion of one who has finally reached the very end of a very long and very lonely road. He looks down at his own hands, the fingers stained forever with copper dust and oil, and he speaks of the bank, of the ledgers, and of the many lives that are treated as mere nameless numbers in a column of cold, black ink. "I did not kill them, Mr. Holmes," he whispers, his voice barely rising above the soft, constant sigh of the wind across the open water. "I only returned to them the true and intrinsic value of their own deep greed. I gave them exactly what they spent, their entire lives chasing a piece of shining metal, a token of status, a pristine copper penny. If they had not reached for it with such desperate and unyielding hunger, the needle would never have found its mark. I merely provided the final mirror. They chose to walk into the glass. The reveal is not a moment of shock or high drama, but a quiet philosophical settling of the cosmic scales. It is the cold logic of the ledger, finally applied to the human soul. A final entry in a book that has been unbalanced for far too long. Edgar does not seek to justify his actions or ask for mercy. He simply presents them as a mathematical necessity, a closing of the account that began on the dark day he was cast out into the fog. The barge continues its gentle, hypnotic rocking against the ancient wharf, a slow and rhythmic movement that serves as a profound lullaby from the river. The boat rises and falls with a steady, metronomic cadence, the wood of the hull groaning softly as it rubs against the thick, protective hempen fenders. It is a sound of absolute and total surrender to the natural elements, a rhythmic swaying that lulls the mind into a state of deep, liquid tranquility. You can feel the vibration of the river through the soles of your feet, a low-frequency hum that connects the small wooden vessel to the vast, moving body of the Thames. The water whispers against the mossy pilings, a repetitive sound of hush and release that seems to wash away the soot of the workshop and the bitterness of the counting house. Holmes remains silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the first thin, pale line of gold is beginning to break the heavy gray of the dawn. He understands deeply that there are debts that the law of men cannot measure and wounds that a crowded courtroom cannot heal. The atmosphere is one of profound understanding and ultimately a quiet, necessary letting go. The Revenge of Edgar Viffi was a masterpiece of patient design, a clockwork tragedy that has now run its full and inevitable course. There are no more pennies to be delivered to the doorsteps of the powerful, and there are no more names to be cleared from the hidden manuscript. The weight of the long obsession has finally lifted, leaving Edgar as hollow and as peaceful as the abandoned shop on Fleur de Lys Lane. The river continues its slow, rhythmic work, carrying the debris of the city toward the horizon. And we sit in the very center of that movement, drifting in a state of quiet, morning grace. As the light grows stronger and the fog begins to lift, Edgar slowly stands, his movements possessing a new and light fluidity. He offers no resistance as the shadows of the law, embodied by the silent and respectful arrival of the river police, move to take him away from the water. He steps from the barge to the stone pier with a rhythmic, measured pace, his eyes never leaving the dark obsidian mirror of the water. He is leaving behind a world of copper and poison, surrendering himself to the slow, mechanical process of human justice with the same quiet dignity he once brought to his meticulous ledgers. The transition is seamless and soft, He is not being captured so much as he is being absorbed back into the gray tapestry of the city. We watch as his tired figure is slowly swallowed by the morning mist, leaving us alone on the deck of the rocking boat, surrounded by the scent of the salt and the rhythmic, eternal song of the rising tide. The final chapter of our long journey moves from the rhythmic rocking of the river to the hushed, cavernous atmosphere of a quiet courtroom within the Old Bailey. The air here is stilled by the immense weight of history, a cool and dignified vacuum that seems to hold its very breath as the proceedings reach their inevitable and silent conclusion. The scent is a familiar, comforting blend of old floor wax, aged parchment, and the faint, dusty aroma of heavy wool robes that have seen decades of service. Sunlight filters through the high, arched windows in long, static beams of pale gold, illuminating the slow, hypnotic dance of dust motes that have likely occupied this hall for centuries. Within this sanctuary of the law, time is no longer measured by the frantic ticking of a clock, but by the slow metronomic reading of the final verdict day monotone, rhythmic recitation that flows through the room like a steady, calm river of words, lulling the senses into a state of deep, philosophical reflection and absolute peace. As the clerk of the court reads the final entries into the record, his voice possesses a hypnotic and consistent quality that requires no mental effort to follow. It is a sound of absolute order, a verbal manifestation of the scales of justice, finding their long-awaited and perfect equilibrium. We sit together in the shadowed gallery, surrounded by a profound silence that is not empty, but filled with the collective, soft breathing of the attendees. It is a rhythmic, communal pulse that only serves to emphasize the stillness of the grand space. Every tiny rustle of a silk gown, or the faint, distant creak of a wooden bench, is muffled by the vastness of the hall, creating a sonic landscape of total tranquility. In this moment, the violence of the distant streets and the cold, hard calculations of the banking house feel like fading memories, replaced by the quiet, heavy solemnity of a final and permanent settlement. Holmes remains perfectly motionless beside me, his gaze fixed on the solitary figure of Edgar V., who stands in the dock with a composure that is almost statuesque in its stillness. There is no trace of fear left in the prisoner's eyes, nor is there the flickering fire of his old defiance. Instead, he possesses the quiet, centered calm of a man who has finally balanced his own internal ledger and found the final result to be correct. We find ourselves reflecting on the thin, invisible line that separates justice from vengeance, and the strange heavy weight that a single gleaming copper penny can carry within the vast and unfeeling machinery of a modern society. A penny is a mere trifle to the powerful, a small fortune to the forgotten, and in the hands of Edgar V., it became a mirror reflecting the hidden, uncomfortable truths of an entire empire. The philosophy of his crime invites the mind to drift through the complexities of human nature, considering the slow accumulation of small, unnoticed cruelties that can eventually tip the scales toward a dark and inevitable outcome. The reveal of Edgar's final plea is not a request for mercy or a desperate denial of his deed. He seeks no forgiveness from the court, nor does he ask for the leniency of the crown. When he is finally invited to speak, his voice is a low, clear resonance that carries to the furthest corners of the gallery without ever being raised in anger. He asks only to be remembered, not as a monster or a common criminal of the slums, but as a man who was once a vital part of the city's living heart, a man who existed fully before he was erased by the dispassionate ink of a bank ledger. It is a haunting, gentle request that lingers in the cool air long after the words have been spoken. He wishes for his story to be the final entry, a permanent and indelible mark in the records that ensures his humanity can never be overwritten a second time. It is a moment of profound, tragic dignity that allows the listener to let go of the tension and simply hold the memory of the man in the quiet of their thoughts. The absolute silence of the gallery returns, deeper and more all-encompassing than it was before. The only movement now is the slow, inevitable shift of the golden sunlight across the dark oak paneling of the court. We are suspended in a state of gentle thought, our minds tracing the circular journey we have taken from the warm, flickering hearth of Baker Street to the thick fog of Whitechapel, through the cold, echoing halls of the bank and the rusting iron ruins of the workshop, finally arriving here at the silent seat of judgment. The rhythmic breathing of the room becomes a lullaby of shared existence, a soft reminder that despite the darkness, there is a fundamental order to the world that always seeks to restore itself to balance. The weight of the mystery has been fully resolved, leaving only a lingering, peaceful question about the true value of a single life in the great, unfolding history of the city. As the court finally rises, and the heavy oak doors are opened once more, we begin our gentle transition back to the world we know. The return to the warm, amber sanctuary of 221B Baker Street is a slow and rhythmic journey through the evening mists. The streets are much quieter now, the fog having turned into a soft, protective blanket that muffles the sound of our carriage wheels against the stones. We return to the very beginning of our circle, to the familiar and welcoming scent of cedar wood, the soft low glow of the fire, and the rhythmic, metronomic ticking of the mahogany grandfather clock. The case of the poison penny is closed, the accounts are settled, and the city is once again at peace under the silver veil of the night. As you settle back into the deep, soft velvet of your armchair, the fire in the hearth has burned down to a steady, comforting crimson glow. The world outside the window is a silent tapestry of shadow and silver mist, and the heavy weight of the day has been completely lifted from your shoulders. Your breath is now slow and even, moving in perfect harmony with the quiet, steady pulse of the room. The image of the gleaming copper penny fades away into the soft darkness, becoming nothing more than a small golden spark in the vast, peaceful expanse of your approaching dream. You are safe, you are warm, and the ledger of the night is finally perfectly balanced. Sleep now, as the fog of London guards the door, and the absolute silence of Baker Street carries you into the deep, restorative currents of the coming dawn. The night has finally reached its deepest and most silent hour. Here, in the familiar and unchanging sanctuary of Baker Street, the world beyond our windows has dissolved into a soft, monochromatic sea of gray mist and absolute stillness. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn tight against the cold, and the only light remaining in our shared world is the warm, orange glow of the dying fire in the hearth. Sherlock Holmes sits in his high-backed chair, his thin, elegant hands resting lightly upon the armrests. The flickering light of the embers dances across his features, casting long, gentle shadows that move in harmony with the slow, rhythmic rising and falling of his breath. There is no longer any tension in his frame, no sharp glint of calculation in his eyes. There is only a profound and settled peace, a quiet recognition that the work is finished and the ledger of the day is finally perfectly closed. As I watch the fire from my own chair, I feel a wave of immense and gentle relief spreading through my mind. Like a warm tide moving over the sand, the weight of the mystery, the darkness of the East End, and the cold arithmetic of the bank have all been lifted away, leaving only a sense of light and unburdened space. The mind, which has traveled so far through the fog and the shadows, is now invited to simply be still. There are no more questions to answer, no more clues to weigh, and no more paths to follow through the labyrinth of the city. Everything has been resolved. Every debt has been accounted for, and every shadow has been brought into the light of understanding. The peace that fills the room is tangible, a heavy and soft blanket that settles over the senses, quieting the heart and slowing the pulse to a steady, tranquil beat. Holmes reaches slowly into the deep pocket of his dressing gown and produces the final object of our long journey. It is the last of the Jubilee pennies, the one found in the hidden manuscript, its copper surface catching the orange light of the fire for one final, brilliant moment. He holds it between his thumb and forefinger, looking at it not with curiosity, but with a quiet, final acknowledgement. Then, with a movement that is as smooth and as slow as the falling of a leaf, he tosses the coin into the very heart of the glowing embers. There is a faint, soft hiss as the metal meets the heat, small melodic sound that lasts for only a second before it vanishes into the steady hum of the fire. We watch as the coin settles into the white-hot core of the hearth, its shape blurring, its luster fading, until it is nothing more than a part of the warmth itself. The evidence of the crime, the instrument of the revenge, has been returned to the elements, dissolved into the soft gray ash of the night. The room is now very RTT, quiet. The only sound that remains is the low, rhythmic sigh of the settling coal, and the distant, muffled chime of a clock striking the hour somewhere far away in the mist. My voice has become a soft, steady whisper, each word drifting further and further apart from the next, like fallen leaves floating upon a slow, dark river. The spaces between the words are growing wider now, filled with the profound and heavy stillness of the house. You can feel the warmth of the fire pressing against your skin, a gentle and constant heat that pulls you deeper into the velvet embrace of your chair. The air is still, the light is dim, and the world is exactly as it should be. There is nothing left to do but to surrender to the deep and restorative currents of the coming sleep. The mysteries are all resolved, the accounts are all balanced, and the city of London is resting under its silver veil of fog. Every street is quiet, every house is still, and every heart is finding its own rhythm in the dark. The darkness is not a void, but a soft and welcoming sanctuary, a place where the mind can finally set down its heavy burdens and drift into the peaceful, golden haze of the dawn. Sleep well, London, sleep well. For the work is done, the fire is fading now, the light is growing soft and low. Each breath is slower than the one before. Each thought is lighter than the one before. The silence is absolute. The peace is complete. Sleep well, for the mysteries are all resolved. Drift away now into the soft gray mist. The ledger is closed. The night is still. Good night.